Bore da, a croeso I seminar drafod ein canllaw hirachaeth caffael cyniliadau newydd ar gyfer y sector cyhoeddus yn Cymru. Enw fi yw Hugh Lloyd, rheolwr cyfrif busnes a chyflawr prosiectau yn RAP Cymru. Good morning and welcome to the seminar to discuss the Sustainable Procurement Hierarchy Guidance for the Public Sector in Wales. My name is Hugh Lloyd and my role is a Business Account and Project Delivery Manager in RAP Cymru. Today, we are giving a brief introduction to our recently published guide to the sustainable public procurement and how this supports the idea of a more circular approach to the procurement and use of goods. This is a high-level review, one that is to stimulate thought, and the purpose of today is for you to reflect on your current procurement practices and how this could be potentially improved. We will cover separate topics in the document with my colleague Sinead Murphy. But first, may I give a brief introduction to RAP and then introduce you to Dr. Andy Rees of Welsh Government and sponsors of the programme, who will give us an overview of the sustainable objectives underpinning the drive to source goods in a more resource-efficient manner. Please note that we will accept questions using the chat function and we'll tackle these at the end of the presentation. Also, we provide an email address for myself, so you can contact us afterwards using either email or we can discuss this by Teams. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of who RAP are and what we're there to deliver. So we're really here to promote the idea of sustainability in society by reinventing what we design, produce, and how we sell, rethinking how we use and consume products, and also redefining what is possible through reuse and recycling. So with no more ado, I shall hand over to Dr. Andy Rees of Welsh Government. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Hugh. As Hugh said, I'll just give you a quick overview of some of the strategic imperatives for more resource-efficient public procurement in Wales. Next slide, please. Just a quick reminder, we have the wellbeing goals. Of course, all 7 goals are equal, but I just wanted to highlight the A Prosperous Wales goal that requires us to have work towards a low carbon society and an economy that uses resources efficiently. On the right there is a reminder of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are no longer in the EU, of course, but we are still obliged to meet all sorts of international requirements and conventions and things that UK government has signed up to. So amongst those 17 goals, which again, of course, are all equal, just highlight goal 12, responsible consumption and production. And Wales needs to do its bit to deliver that goal. Next slide, please. Just a quick reminder of the new net zero target of 100% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050 and the new interim target of 63% reduction by 2030. So as you can see, there is a huge amount of effort that needs doing over what is left of this decade to achieve that 63% target. And of course, public procurement has a key role to play within this. Next slide, please. There's a goal. A goal has been set overall for the Welsh public sector of net zero by 2030. The Partnership Council for Wales released a joint statement in June, and just to highlight that they included procured goods and services as part of as one of the key priorities to address. Next slide, please. Just to explain where some of the carbon emissions come from, hopefully you're all aware of this, but in case not, I'll go over it quickly. Scope 1 of the direct emissions associated with, say, heating. If you have a boiler, a gas boiler or oil boiler, the carbon dioxide that's emitted from there, from your premises, and also the vehicle emissions associated with the vehicles that staff use. Scope 2 emissions are the indirect ones relating to the energy usage on site, so electricity, so that is the emissions in the power station. And then scope 3, that is often overlooked, are all of the emissions through the supply chain of goods and services that you procure, and then all of the emissions associated with the waste that's produced and disposed of. Next slide, please. Okay, going to a bit of life cycle assessment here. Something that those who are life cycle assessment practitioners will know well. but perhaps not everybody knows this sort of level of detail. If we go at the top there, the raw materials that are extracted to go into the products that we use and consume all require energy to extract from the earth. So whether it's a digger or a drill or whatever, that involves the use of fuel, diesel, etc., with carbon emissions. And then transporting those raw materials into a factory, of course, also results in carbon emissions. And then the manufacturing process itself often involves heat or energy or electricity, and that also involves a lot of carbon emissions. So up to that point, those are the embedded carbon emissions of that product. Then the product is used. When it's discarded, ideally it's recycled, and recycling it avoids all of those emissions that I talked about earlier. Although recycling has some emissions, but not as many at all as the raw material extraction and processing. If the waste is thrown away to either composting, combustion, in energy from waste, or landfilling, there are carbon emissions associated with that. Composting is biogenic carbon, so that's not a worry. But the combustion of fossil fuel derived plastic waste releases fossil fuel carbon dioxide. And landfilling releases methane, which is anything from 30 to 80 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. So it is a very significant greenhouse gas. Next slide, please. In the Beyond Recycling, our new circular economy strategy published in March, there is a brief explanation of what embedded carbon means. When we talk about low carbon, we don't mean consisting of very little of the carbon element. What we mean is low embedded carbon. So wood is actually low embedded carbon, even though of course it's actually made of carbon. But hopefully this explanation explains it's that what I showed you before in terms of life cycle assessment. It's the sort of inventory of carbon dioxide that was emitted to make that product. Next slide, please. In terms of circular economy, resource efficiency in general, as I mentioned, it is in the A Prosperous Wales goal, but it's also embedded through all of these relevant policies, natural resources policy. Obviously, it's in a low carbon Wales delivery plan. It's in the manufacturing action plan, economic action plan, also on the Planning Policy Wales 2021. And then, of course, really important for this event today, circular economy and resource efficiency are enshrined within the procurement policy statement that was issued a few months ago. Next slide, please. Just to explain our goals, Beyond Recycling is going for a net zero carbon Wales, of course, and using only our fair share of the Earth's resources, one planet by 2050. This slide shows very briefly what we mean. On the left, we currently use 3 planets worth of resources, hence the slide, hence the arrows are quite thick, and it is a very short circle. So materials flow around too quickly, too much waste goes to landfill, and also to energy recovery. And a lot of products, a lot of raw materials are used. On the right is where we want to get to, 1 planet resource use, so the arrows are much thinner and longer. So we want to keep those resources in productive use for as long as possible through more durability, longer life, more repair, remanufacturing and reuse, and far less going to landfill or energy recovery, and far less use of natural raw materials. Next slide, please. 1 planet target, conscious of time, I won't labour it, but it's pretty obvious that if everyone around the world tried to use 3 planets worth of resources, we'd be in big trouble. So it's a moral imperative that it's only fair that everyone else around the world has the right to live with the same standard of living as us. So we've all got to try and dematerialize our consumption and use far less, but of course still be prosperous and have good well-being. And importantly, over half of our overall global carbon emissions relate to the products we have purchased. So it's those embedded scope 3 carbon emissions that I mentioned earlier. And in terms of resilience, of course, there is global competition for resources. So the more we can make best use out of those resources that we have, keep them circulating and not dispose of them, then the more resilient our economy will be in the future. Next slide, please. Beyond Recycling, the new circular economy strategy published in March has those 6 key themes. So driving innovation and materials use and upscaling prevention and reuse. are the ones where we need to focus most of our attention, but also do more recycling and build on the record that we already have. And of course, engage communities, the businesses and the public sector, and make sure we have the relevant levers aligned to help deliver all of this. And public procurement is a key one of those levers. Next slide, please. We have 8 key actions and then probably around 40 to 50 sub-actions, but of course I won't go into that level of detail. But one of the key actions signed up to by ministers in Cabinet and the First Minister is we will procure on a basis which prioritises goods and products which are made from remanufactured, refurbished, recycled, and probably a few re's as well, all come from low carbon and sustainable materials like wood. And that's what today's event is all about, really. Next slide, please. We want to build on our success. Wales has done incredibly well on recycling, and if anyone attending this event is from a local authority, huge congratulations. A lot of it down to yourselves and of course the wonderful Welsh public. So on the bottom left there is where we were a few years ago. The depth, the shade of green reflects how high the recycling rate. Top left, top right, and then bottom right is where we are actually now. And as you can see, the Welsh local authorities are leading the way across the whole of the UK, and we're actually 3rd in the world in terms of our recycling rate. And the key thing is that it's incredibly consistent across Wales as well, certainly compared to councils in the rest of the UK. Next slide, please. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take questions if there's time, but I look forward to the rest of the event, and thank you very much for participating and listening in to this really important session. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Andy. So next slide, please. Okay, so really we're just going to talk a bit more about what the benefits are of sustainable procurement, which I'm sure are quite familiar to us all. Environmental, as Andy mentioned before, the circular approach objectives is that sustainable procurement will have a lower impact on the Earth's natural resources and enable future generations to benefit from these materials. Plus, of course, there's less impact because of lower pollution rates. It's strategic as well, because in sourcing local materials, there's a conscious effort to not buy things which are made from a far distance away. And also you're looking at it in terms of having those materials available to you. I think a particularly good example of this is last year when we had the PPE crisis. So then there were shortages in supply because a lot of it was manufactured in the Far East. Of course, you were competing with other countries for these materials. Whereas if actually this was made from recycled materials, you were keeping them in country, and also you were having them there available to be made into PPE potentially as well. Socially, because we can look at this as benefiting local communities and employment and materials and goods, but also upskilling the local communities and keeping money in circulation on a local basis that way. And financial, in that looking at the whole life cost of goods can mean that we save money in the long run in developing what is needed at a lower annual cost. But we'll have other examples of that later on in the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, please. So the whole idea today is really to discuss the ethos of the hierarchy. It's a guide to better behavior, to promote ideas and discussion within the organization and introduce new forms of evaluation and really gain a better idea of what value is about, and formulate a long-term strategy and direction for procurement. So the next slide, please. And then this, to me, is central to what the document is about. So you can see that it's based on the waste hierarchy, but also making people think a bit more about when you procure, what is it that you're trying to do in terms of minimizing your impact on the environment? Do we actually need it? If we are going to buy it, is it made of recycled materials? Can it be repaired? Can it be refurbished? Can you extend the life of this for as long as economically possible? What are the options? What happens to it at the end of life? So there's a spectrum of things, but also it shows you a kind of a map, if you like, of going through the various stages or questions you should be asking to determine when you procure something, what should you be looking for. So if you go to the next slide, please. And then at this point, I hand over to my colleague Sinead, and she'll carry on from here. Thank you, Sinead.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, I'm Sinead Murphy. I'm a Business Account and Project Delivery Manager at WRAP, and I work alongside Hugh and our colleague Thomas Funk on our Public Sector Sustainable Procurement Support Programme. So this morning I'll be taking you through the steps in the procurement hierarchy. So the first of these steps is reduce. And this stage is really the most important because it's when you should consider if the purchase of the product is even necessary. So before you carry out your procurement, you should be asking several questions here. Do we need to purchase the item, or can we get by without it altogether? What do we have that is underutilized? Is what we already own being used to its full potential? If something is broken, can it economically be repaired? Can we share items with other departments or organizations? And what can we do to reduce consumption, especially around single-use items? So reducing at source and using what you already have is invariably going to be the lowest cost option, and often will be the option with the most sustainable outcome, and it'll be critical in reaching our net zero goals. So repair is really an important part of this. Oftentimes items will get classed as broken and get thrown away when it could be relatively simple and economic to repair it, and it could be turned into a useful item again. So developing relationships with local repair businesses and organisations will help your organisation save money, but it'll also support the local economy. So organisations should really only be looking to get rid of items that have become unreliable, economically unrepairable, or items that, there's a more efficient or a far more efficient model available on the market. So we have several case studies for you today to give real life examples of the principles within the hierarchy. And we're going to start with Caerphilly Borough Council. Caerphilly worked with WRAP Cymru to look at what they could do to reduce the impact of problematic and single-use plastics in their food and drink supply chain. So we have a short video now from Rhys James, Principal Procurement Officer at Caerphilly, outlining the project.
Hi, my name is Rhys James. I'm a Principal Procurement Officer with Caerphilly County Borough Council. We worked in collaboration with WRAP Cymru to take steps to reduce the impact of single-use plastics in our food and drink supply chain. We undertook an audit of what and how much we were procuring, and we also consulted widely within the council to understand how those products were being used and disposed of. We then consulted externally with our suppliers to understand the product specifications, pricing and availability of any alternatives. We also consulted with our waste management contractors to understand their waste acceptance criteria. Based on the information gathered from the consultations, coupled with the cost analysis for various different interventions, a number of changes were made to either eliminate or substitute products from the supply chain. In addition, financial mechanisms such as charges and levies were introduced to encourage positive behaviour and change and reduce the consumption of products and materials containing plastic in general. The work identified that avoidance, levies on disposables, and the sale of reusable containers at a profit could help the council offset the costs of more expensive alternatives to plastic.
So going down the hierarchy, the next thing to consider is to reuse and resource. If you've decided that your existing assets won't meet your need and you do need to procure a new or at least a new item to you, think about methods outside of a traditional purchase of a brand new item. So you could look at, for example, leasing or hiring, where ownership is retained by the supplier and where they provide a service package to maintain and repair and take back the item at the end of the contract. This really incentivizes the supplier to ensure that the life of the item is optimized. And the model is actually really well established in different product types already. So, fleet is a good example, furniture and ICT. Another route would be to look into buying used, refurbished or remanufactured items in place of a new item. And just quickly to explain the difference, remanufactured products are those that are sold as new with an equivalent warranty. Refurbished items are typically cheaper than remanufactured items and come with a correspondingly shorter warranty. And in both cases, percentages of new materials used in these products should typically be below 25% of the product's weight, and it should also deliver cost savings compared to new items. Directly reused products will not be restored to a like new state, but they can perform as well and they're as safe as a new product. But oftentimes these products will come without a warranty, but they will provide significant cost savings. Important, I suppose, to note when buying second-hand, you need to ensure that the items will be of adequate quality and will broadly be as reliable and as efficient as the new model that may have otherwise been bought. And there are other innovative procurement systems out there focused on reuse, one of them being Warpit. Warpit serves as like an eBay-like platform for organisations to redistribute surplus assets. And in some instances, organisations require employees to check the Warpit system to see if what they need is already available before they go out and procure something new. Halda University Health Board adopted the use of Warpit, and we have a short video now from Stuart Jones of Halda to explain how it's been beneficial for them. And also just to note, we have just published a case study on our website, which is available on the procurement pages and RAP Cymru's website on Halda's use of Warpit.
My name is Stuart Jones and I work for Halda University Health Board in West Wales, an NHS board providing community health care. The Health Board has an ongoing objective to reduce waste and costs. So in July 2018, we adopted the Warpit IT software platform. This is an online tool that allows different departments and individual employees to both pass on and procure equipment and furniture already owned by the Health Board. Instead of buying it in, Warpit users can look at what is already available within the organisation, a bit like an internal eBay without money changing hands. This has significant cost and environmental advantages. For example, by redeploying surplus and unwanted items from one department to another, we have saved an estimated £230,000. Retaining and reallocating perfectly good equipment also helps us to meet our sustainability targets by reducing waste. What's more important, the items are immediately available. This approach has been adopted by the workforce and represents an effective way of being both resource efficient and cost effective. It's a viable option for organisations wanting to better manage their assets and lower their costs.
So if you can't find suitable reused or refurbished products and you need to buy new, you should aim to buy sustainable products. Your first consideration will be around life expectancy of the product, and this really stems from its durability and reliability. So you should be asking for information such as expected service life or info on reliability such as mean time between failure. Won't always be available or the information mightn't be reliable. So really the key is to look at the warranty and service contract on offer. And this will generally indicate the supplier's confidence in the product's reliability and durability. Secondly, if you want to improve circularity and reduce your carbon impact, it's important to specify the most sustainable materials possible. These could include specifying post-consumer recycled content. So some products like steel, aluminium and cardboard already have high levels of recycled content. So it's really important when you're specifying things like plastics, textiles and fibre boards that you do specify some targets for recycled content, really to help those markets evolve. Considering renewable bio-based materials, they generally have a lower carbon footprint. Wood is a good example, but you obviously need to make sure it's sustainably sourced. Organic material content, so those materials are products which avoid additives such as pesticides or fertilizers or growth regulators. Importantly, is reducing the use of virgin critical raw materials. We really need to be thinking about recycling of critical raw materials and also the reuse of components containing critical raw materials, and is particularly important for circularity of electrical and electronic products. Reuse of components, so for example, in an otherwise new product, so for example, if you're buying a table and you have casters from a previous product that are completely fine, you know, do you need to buy the whole table with the casters, etc. attached? Also ensure you're avoiding hazardous materials, and most notably, heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants should be avoided. Ideally, you should really be avoiding anything on the UK REACH substances, a very high concern candidate list. And finally, responsible sourcing. You know, ensuring that procured goods are ethically sourced and haven't caused environmental or social harm during their production. And there's different certifications and standards for different materials and types, different materials, and many of these are listed on our procurement hierarchy guidance. Thirdly, products should either be recyclable and or compostable. So ideally, 100% recyclable products at the end of their life. And this is particularly important for single-use items. It's important also to understand what we mean by recyclable. So technically, a lot of products are recyclable, but materials can only be recycled effectively if they are able to be collected and sorted in the waste management system, if they're able to be reprocessed at scale at the UK, and if the majority of the material has been made into a new product. Compostability is a less circular alternative to recycling, but there are applications where it is appropriate. The important thing when procuring compostable products is that you understand how these are going to be used and disposed of. So this will entail speaking with your waste management teams and contractors. Separate uncontaminated collections and disposal to appropriate composting facilities are required, and your waste contract really should be able to tell you if it's possible. Next slide, please. So before you procure, planning for what happens to products at the end of life can help reduce carbon emissions and contribute to the wellbeing goals in particular for globally responsible Wales. So it's important that buyers consider and take responsibility for what happens to a product at the end of a contract or the product's life. And organisations are losing out by poor end-of-life management. So either financially on potential income from resale of items, socially on the benefit of donating goods or creating local employment, and obviously then the opportunity to reduce carbon emissions by redirecting resources from landfill or incineration. So working with suppliers that offer take back at the end of life and building it into contracts can ensure that after use, products and materials will be dealt with in a circular way. And suppliers are likely to offer this voluntarily if the items retain some value when they're no longer needed. So users should do all they can to maintain the product in good condition so that it can be reused, refurbished or remanufactured as either a whole product or as component parts. So furniture, ICT, even cooking oil are all examples of where take back is common. And there's a textiles workwear example in the procurement hierarchy guidance document. I will also play just a short video clip from Diane Brooks from Lyrico, who will tell us a bit more on their circular paper solution, which includes both an example of take back and use of a sustainable product.
Hello, my name is Diane Brooks and I'm Framework Manager Public Sector Wales here at Lyrico. Lyrico are the European leader and the third largest workplace distributor of workplace products and services. We stock over 11,000 products across 18 categories, ranging from PPE, hygiene and hospitality, through to general office products, furniture and ergonomics. We work tirelessly to ensure that the way we work is sustainable and contributes to a positive future for our planet. It is clearer than ever that the impact of climate change is one of the world's largest threats. This is why at Lyrico we are determined to put in place positive initiatives to help tackle this global climate emergency. We are convinced that the circular economy model is the best approach to this, and so we pledge to develop fully circular workplace products and solutions by 2025 for our customers and employees. One of the ways that we do this is by offering 100% recycled paper as part of a true circular economy approach. By this I mean, not only do we provide paper which is wholly comprised of recycled materials, but we can also take back securely shredded paper from our customers and recycle this back into copier paper and or other paper-based products that can be used again. This process is much more sustainable than traditional paper production, as it uses less water, less energy and fewer virgin materials. Not only does this produce a lower carbon footprint, but the solution also provides cost reductions for our customers. In addition to the recycled paper, Lyrico proudly operate the Cymru Copier Scheme and partner with Welsh-based social enterprises who provide a local collection and shredding service for the used paper. The scheme has resulted in the gainful employment of 19 long-term unemployed and or disabled people, as well as providing in excess of 25 apprenticeships across the South Wales region. This initiative is just one of the many ways in which Lyrico is moving towards a circular economy model, working with local communities and companies to secure sustainable ways at reducing costs and with significant environmental benefits. Diolch yn fawr iawn I ti am gwrando. Diane Brooks, Lyrico. Hwyl fawr nawr.
This is my own phone, actually. because this is something which I think we all use every day. And one, for something which is so small, is a particularly intensive resource-wise bit of technology. I was listening to a podcast by the Which magazine a couple of weeks ago, and what really interested me is that 63% have changed phones in the last 3 years. So there's a fair old turnover of these things, even though really it hasn't changed very much in function in the last 5, maybe even 10 years. So if we bought our first phone when we were 14 and we carried on using it until we were, say, 80, that means we'd go through about 30 phones of our own lifetime. And each phone contains nearly half of the empirical table elements, of which there are 106 in total. So it just shows you the complexity of these items. And also in mining them and in sourcing these, they do have a big impact on the environment. So these rare earth metals are linked to child exploitation, pollution, and significant CO2 impact. For example, it's estimated there are 40,000 children working in the Congo looking for cobalt and other rare earth metals, working for between $1 and $2 a day. So it does have other costs that we don't really take into account of. 50% of people never dispose of their phones, which is another fascinating statistic. This means there's about 400 million electronic unused devices in the UK alone, based on research by the Royal Society of Chemistry. And 53% of people have paid for their mobile phone to be fixed in the last 2 years. So there's that constant, what do you do with it if the screen is cracked or if it's not working, functioning as you would expect? And are these things designed for obsolescence? Now, my phone there, when I looked into it, only has software updates for 2 years. So then after that, because it's not updated, certain apps will start to fail. Maybe the security would be compromised. And so it could be something that a lot of people would be driven to be replacing after just 2 years. So the next slide, please. So it comes back to this waste hierarchy again. And I think this is particularly useful for a mobile phone, because if I was going to use this and say, right, do I actually need a mobile phone? Well, I think lots of people are working from home. So if that's the case, then you could even say, well, I know that Microsoft can offer me a virtual number. So is it something that I could do away with completely? Might be a bit radical for most people, because I know how attached we are to our mobile phones. Could well be, instead of having 2 mobile phones, which I have a work one and a personal one, is it something that we could have a dual SIM and just have the 1 unit, so we don't have to have 2 units and that needless duplication of resources that way? Could it be something that is already being refurbished or remanufactured? What is it made of? Could it be recycled? So there's a whole variety of questions I think we should be asking ourselves when we use this mobile phone as a particular example. But if you go to the next slide, this I think is a particularly interesting one, because this is a company which is based in Holland and they are called Fairphone. And their whole ethos is about having a phone which is sustainable and very much in line of the circular economy, as mentioned before. So it's a modular design, which means you can disassemble it and you can assemble it yourself quite easily. So that means you can make the repairs, and you can also upgrade it as needed. It's made from 100% recycled materials, or from materials which come from conflict-free regions of the world. Manufacturers pay a fair wage to the people who actually make these things. Software support is for at least 5 years, they say on their website. So then it makes it a very flexible solution, and one where you could use for a very long time. They offer a take-back system for refurbishment. And also, I think this is a particularly interesting one when it comes to life costs. So if my phone was, say, £200, but it only lasted 2 years, and the software was only for 2 years, but this lasted 5 years and was £300, then on a year-by-year basis, you could say that this is probably better value because it can last. Also, this is something, as I mentioned before, is a phone that can be upgraded. So if you needed a better camera, or if maybe the battery technology got better or the battery failed, you could swap them around and then you could just carry on using this. So in the next slide, please. So the whole ethos of this hierarchy is that it's a map to reduce your impact on the environment through procurement, but like any map, the end destination could be reached by various routes. So it's not rigid and it's not set. It's for you to really take that backward step and really look at what you're trying to achieve, what you're procuring, and how could it be altered to make it more sustainable. So this is a dynamic process, one that will change with time and requirements for your own organisation. And RAP Cymru, funded by Welsh Government, can help you on the journey with our public sector procurement programme. So I'll give you a bit more information about that later on. So before any procurement exercise, an organisation should consider if they need an item and how to resource the use of this in the most sustainable way. So if you go to the next slide, please. So through our programme, we can provide support anywhere along the procurement process to drive demand for more sustainable products. We offer one-to-one organisational support, and that could be strategic advice, such as helping to embed sustainable procurement in policy and process, or analysing spend to identify opportunities for more sustainable procurement. We also support on individual procurements, early on in the planning stage, engaging with suppliers to assess market capacity for more sustainable solutions, through to tender development, evaluation, and contract management and monitoring. We also provide support across sector and categories of spend where there is a knowledge gap or barrier. We are currently looking at construction, working closely with Construction Excellence to address gaps around the monitoring and reporting of recycled content and reuse in construction projects. Finally, we have tools to promote behaviour change, such as tools and guidance, and these are on the document as well then. So in the next slide, please. So this is our contact details. So can I please say that the one thing I can say which has been good about the pandemic is that we are all using Teams and Zoom these days. So you have my contact email there and Thomas's as well. And then if you want to get in touch with us with any questions, or if you want to have a quick chat with myself or Thomas or Sinead on Teams, then please feel free to do so. And I guess this would be the perfect time to see if we have any questions. And if there aren't any, then as I said, we can just say it's we record this and it'll be available to you. And as I said before, I would really encourage people to get in touch with us and start discussing what your procurement needs are and where we can help. So there is one question: is it possible to provide further information on Warpit? Well, there is the case study, and there will be one published on our website. So if you drop me a quick email after this, I'll send you the link to it. But the Warpit one is, I think, a particularly good one, because with the whole example, they did actually provide significant cost savings, and it was stuff which they already had, but it was just being reallocated within the organization. Sorry, Andy, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Hugh, as my colleague David Blair put in the chat bar, we've been having discussions with Warpit to see how a number of public sector bodies in Wales could join and what sort of cost that would be. Yeah. So I think David put his email in the chat bar. So if anyone's interested, get in touch with David Blair. Yeah, there's a possibility we might be able to fund a certain number of memberships, but don't, yeah, I can't commit to it totally. That'll be a decision for the minister, but it's possible.
Okay, thank you. And then I just wonder if there are any other questions that we have. I think that will be it in that case. As I said, you have our contact details there, plus the one that's been provided for by Andy as well. So I would be very welcome to answer any questions that you might have. But as I said, you know, if there are any questions and you wanted to have a quick Teams meeting about this, but as I said, you know, the public sector procurement program is there specifically to help public sector organizations achieve their targets when it comes to sustainable procurement. And this is in line with what Welsh Government is trying to achieve and the impact that you have. You have the £6 billion spend. So it's very important to get you on board with this. And this is something which is sponsored fully by Welsh Government and is there as a resource for you to use.